Now, let's go now to our passage then and read from Genesis chapter 4 and reading from verse 1. And it says, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." In verse 2, "And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground." This is Genesis chapter 4, reading from verses 1 and 2. Now there are two little details which are quite important in this short passage which we've read. So first and foremost, it says that Eve conceived and bore Cain. And then in verse 2, "And again she bore his brother Abel." So the first thing that we learn is that Cain was the firstborn and Abel was the secondborn. So Cain was the elder son. Abel was the younger son. The other detail is that it says, now Abel was a keeper of sheep. He was a shepherd. Cain, a tiller of the ground. He was a farmer. Now, what actually is the meaning of this? And what are the implications of these two details that we are seeing? Well, first and foremost, is the question that in this short two verses, it's very clear that it's emphasized that Cain is the firstborn. Cain is the firstborn son. Now, we know that in the Bible, being the firstborn made a person have the right to inheritance. So the firstborn was the one who inherited his father's property, his father's goods. So, for instance, if you read from Genesis chapter 27, verse 1 and verse 4, it says, "When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, 'My son.' And he answered, 'Here I am.'" And in verse 4, he says, "Prepare for me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, and that I may bless you before I die." So the firstborn was the one who had the blessing of the father. He was the one who would inherit everything that the father had. The firstborn was the one who inherited. He was first, and he was the one who inherited. So it means, for instance, that all the property of the father, if the father had land, if the father had animals, if the father had anything, it was the firstborn who would inherit. That means that Cain was, if you like, the favorite son. He was the one who would inherit almost everything that Adam possessed. And if Adam was the first man and everything that God had created practically belonged to Adam, then it means that that Cain was the one who would inherit practically everything. As for Abel, the younger son, not much. He would more or less be subordinate to his brother. So Cain was, if you like, the privileged son. The privileged son. Again, it says that Cain was the tiller of the ground and Abel was a shepherd. And what is the meaning of that? Now, in ancient times, in antiquity, practically there were only two main occupations that people, had. Someone was either a farmer or he was a shepherd. Those were the two main occupations of antiquity. And in the Bible, most of the people that we read about are either farmers or they are shepherds. But there was an interesting and important difference. The farmer was definitely superior to the shepherd. Why? Because the farmer was the one, first and foremost, who owned the land on which the shepherd would bring his animals. So the farmer was the landowner. Apart from that, the farmer was the one who was technologically advanced. He was the one who knew the seasons, when to plant, when to harvest, when to plow, and so on and so forth. So farming was definitely more technologically advanced than a nomadic life where you carry your animals and go in search, and anywhere you find grass or water, you give them to drink. So the farmer was far more technologically advanced. Secondly, the farmer was the person who was stable. The nomad, the shepherd, would go, everywhere. He didn't have a house of his own. He didn't have buildings. He only lived in a tent. But no, the farmer was the one who would build because he had a sedentary lifestyle. He would remain in one place. And therefore, the farmer was the builder of cities. He was the builder of cities. If anyone was going to become king, it wasn't the nomad, it was the farmer. So it's very interesting in this story how Cain is placed. He is the privileged son. Number one, he's the firstborn. Number two, he's the farmer. Now, that really is the first problem of our story. How on earth and for what reason will somebody who is more privileged, who is the farmer, who is the firstborn, why on earth would he be jealous about his brother, who was only a shepherd, who would inherit next to nothing? Why does somebody who is privileged rise up against somebody who is less privileged? Does it make sense? Is it even rational? That is the first problem of the story.